What should you do when you're facing an Argo CD disaster? And how can you get better performance than the default Redis that's shipped with Argo CD? Can you even ditch Redis in Argo CD? Do you even need it? All of that today on Argo Unpacked. I am your host, Dan Garfield, coming to you live from the snow-crested wastelands of Salt Lake City. We've been hit by a snowstorm, and so everything is crazy today. But first up, I want to talk to you before we bring in a guest. We have a special guest who is going to share some really great insights about Redis, its role in Argo CD, and some possible advantages to using a service from AWS, maybe to run your Redis cache instead via Valkey. So we'll look at that. But before that, we're going to kick off with our first Argo tip. What do you do in an Argo CD disaster? The very first step. So let's say you come in, an Argo CD is all locked up. You're trying to access the UI, but things are not responding very well. The performance is bad. You've been a really good admin. You set up your Prometheus metrics, your Grafana dashboard, and you go and you look at the metrics and you see that the CPU is pinned at 100. You see that the queue is growing and you can't get anything to respond. Now you're used to managing everything through Argo CD. So when it's not responsive, suddenly it's like you're back in the dark ages. You have to go back to kubectl to figure out what's going on. So when this happens, if this ever happens to you, there's a precise set of steps you should follow that are going to get you back on track. And that's what this week's Argo tip is about. Now, I'm going to have some resources for you later, probably another week that I wanted to have up for this. But the very first thing you should do when this happens is install a sync window. Now, Argo CD sync windows are an incredibly important feature that a lot of people neglect. They're not aware of them. Maybe they don't know how to use them. But basically, sync windows are rules that define when sync and reconciliation can occur, if there's specific times when it's allowed, if it's not allowed. So the very first thing you should do is add a sync window that disables all syncing. Now, even if you have a bunch of auto sync applications running, this sync window is going to override all of those things, and it's going to disable all synchronization. Now, why is that important? Well, the number one reason that people have Argo get locked up or get into trouble is usually a controller fight. So let's say you install like a pod auto scaler that's changing the number of replicas on your service. And Argo CD is set to auto sync with self heal, which means that it will look at what's set in Git and it will go and overwrite that replica value. And then your auto scaler goes in and overwrites that, and they get in a fight and they start going like this, like crazy. And sometimes I've seen it where it's happening across dozens or hundreds of different services. And it's not always just an autoscaler. It could be Kyverno adds patching when it syncs. There are a bunch of injection webhooks that you can have run. Kyverno, for example, adds annotations onto resources that it wants to manage. And so Argo CD can get a fight with that. And then you're fighting with the Kyverno controller. So there's all these different controllers that could be running in your cluster. And a lot of times as people move into Argo CD, they're not always aware of what controllers are running. And sometimes they'll first launch this and things will work okay. Maybe it's a little slow, but it's usable. But over time, it maybe degrades and suddenly you're going to do a performance change or a performance problem. Or maybe there's some other bottleneck that was cleared. But at any rate, this can happen where basically Argo CD is locked up because it's locked into this really crazy reconciliation loop. So by adding a sync window to deny all synchronization, even those auto syncs, it's going to immediately halt the repo server and application controllers work that they're doing to go and try to reconcile and regenerate manifests and all this stuff over and over again. And that should immediately calm everything way down and allow you to get into Argo CD. And you'll be able to see exactly what's out of sync, try to figure out what's causing it. And you can go through and write rules for those different ignore differences that where you want to delegate. Basically, you can delegate certain fields within your Kubernetes manifests to be managed by a controller. If you can do that in Argo CD, then Argo CD stops fighting with that controller. And once you've added those ignore differences, those applications will no longer show up as out of sync. And then you can remove your sync window and everything should be calm. So super easy, sync window to block synchronization. Argo CD performance should calm right down, and then you can get back to business. Now, there are some other scenarios that can occur that may still cause Argo CD to be locked up, even when you've disabled synchronization. For that, we have the nuclear option. And the nuclear option is you go and you scale down the application controller to 0 replicas. Once you do that, Argo CD no longer has any way to communicate with its target clusters that it's deploying to. That means it can no longer generate diffs that you can review because it doesn't have access to those clusters. It also isn't going to be able to self-repair and bring those replicas up because Argo CD doesn't have a way to talk to any clusters without the application controller. This could be useful if maybe your issue is caused by application sets going crazy and regenerating tons of stuff and trying to get synchronization moving that way, or regenerating tons of diffs because applications keep on being regenerated. So that would be maybe a third step, is to disable the application set controller. But really, sync windows will solve 99% of problems. The nuclear option of scaling down your application controller to 0 replicas will allow you to go in and start seeing what's going on. If there's different behavior, that would prevent any reconciliation from triggering at all. So that would be a nuclear option. And then, of course, looking at your application set controller to see if it's going haywire. Those would be kind of the 3 things that I would do in order, but the sync window is going to do most of it. I will share another day. I'm sorry, we're right next to the holidays. I will share another day an example of a sync window for Argo CD of how to do that. I'll put up a GitHub repo so you can grab it. But it's very simple. In the documentation, we have in the Argo CD documentation, we have instructions for how to create a sync window. You can apply it directly to the cluster using kubectl. If you're using Octopus Deploy, you could use a runbook to do that. And once that's done, everything should settle down and you can go and figure out what's going on. And once you've gone through and figured out what's generating all those diffs that's causing this crazy reconciliation loop, and you fix those things, it's really nice because you basically can preview all your work in Argo CD because it'll show you if it's out of sync or not. And so once you figure that out, you can just remove the sync window and you'll be back to smooth sailing. So there's your Argo tip of the week. We're headed into the holidays. We just had ArgoCon and KubeCon. We'll talk about that for maybe just a minute. And in terms of Argo news, there's not a ton right at this moment, just because it is coming through the holidays and a lot of people are out. I did see that there was a lot of activity from the Argo maintainer OSS team here at Octopus with a lot of bug fixes pushed in the last couple of weeks. Probably a couple that we'll get into maybe in the next episode. And then we do have, of course, a new version of Argo CD released. And that also means that all of the 2X releases, 2.14 and below, are now out of support. So if you're still using Argo CD 2 in any capacity, you need to go and upgrade. You are not getting CVE fixes. You are not getting bug fixes. Go to 3.0. There's great release notes on how to do the upgrade. It's meant to be a minimal impact release. It basically adds a lot of default behavior, but all of those things can be restored to 2X behavior if you so choose. And there's just a handy guide in the upgrade that will just tell you how to look for any things that might cause issues. Now, almost all of the things that we changed in 3.0 in default behavior were things that nobody was really using in 2X. So it would be unusual if you were impacted by any of those things. It's meant to be pretty much a turnkey upgrade. So go ahead and do that and enjoy. Now, without any further ado, I want to introduce today's episode topic. We're going to be talking about Redis's role in Argo CD and what our options are, how we can maybe improve that. And to help lead that discussion, I'm going to bring on Netanel, who wrote a great blog post about this. And of course, we're going to wish Rivital wasn't able to join today. She wasn't feeling well. So Rivital, we wish you a speedy recovery, and we'll get you back in hopefully in the next episode. Without any further ado, Netanel, thanks for joining us today on Argo Unpacked.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that kind of triggered us to want to talk to you was there's been, first of all, a lot of conversation about Redis in the last year. Obviously, they changed their license, and this caused a lot of folks heartburn. That's led to Valkey being created. There's also some other alternatives to Redis like Dragonfly and some others. Now, Argo CD still ships by default with Redis. And what caught our eye is you wrote this great blog post about what led you to replace Redis with an alternative. So maybe you want to start by telling us just a quick overview of the change that you made, and then we can get into why and some of the benefits.
Yeah, so Argo CD uses Redis in many areas, mainly in the controller, repo server, and the application controller. And we saw many how do you say
performance and cost, I think.
Yeah, performance and cost issues that led us to decide, why do we need Redis? Let's use a better solution like Valkey, and that's where we began.
Yeah, so you didn't just use Valkey, you actually chose AWS's hosted Elasticache service. And so did you consider self-hosting Valkey, or was it just, hey, we've got a turnkey option right here, let's just use that?
So beside the issues with Redis, replacing Redis with Valkey maybe have the same issues. Like from networking side, our Redis is used in Argo CD with the master and HA proxy for HA deployment. Makes in AWS and I think in GCP also, when I checked, a lot of cost comes from the network, the traffic. So this issue will still be the same, right? But you have the benefits of Valky, but the downside of Redis.
So from the network traffic didn't change. You're still paying. You don't have to pay an extra fee to go from the Kubernetes cluster to the Elasticache versus having in cluster.
So using Redis in cluster, we paid only for networking about $2,000 per month, only from networking. That's not including the compute and mainly the compute and the networking. So 2,000 only for networking. When we switch to managed service, it's a serverless service. So you pay only for the request and the storage, and we drop to about $100 per month. So
yeah, so a 95% reduction. It was $2,000 a month in just network costs to about $100 total.
Yep.
And that's not including what you were paying for the compute before, because you were you had this was something else that I thought was interesting about your setup, because you had dozens of Argo CD instances, and since you had hundreds of Kubernetes clusters with thousands of applications, you had, I think, 6 Redis HA pods running on essentially each Argo CD instance. So that adds up quite a bit. I mean, that's a pretty quick cost driver. I mean, $2,000 a month is a lot of money to be spending on Redis.
Yeah. So when you use the HA configuration for Argo, you have 3 pods for Redis. One is the master, and 3 pods for HA proxy. When you communicate with the Redis, you first go to the HA proxy and then to the Redis master. So if you have, like, let's say your HA proxy, you're talking with the HA proxy in a different zone, and then coming back to the same zone, you have 4 inter-AZ communications. So you're crossing the AZ 4 times, go and back and forth. And with the managed instance, you pay only once for the ingress.
Why does it have to cross 4 times? Because I thought I've essentially got Redis installed on my Kubernetes cluster with Argo CD. The only services that are really engaging with it are repo server and application controller. They're on the same cluster. And even when you're running Redis HA, I would have thought that would have just been on the cluster. So, but it sounds like you're saying that they would have to leave the zone to communicate with the Redis instance, because you were adding a separate proxy for the Redis HA.
Basically, you have like you said, the application controller, the repo server, and the Argo UI server, like the backend server you use with for the Argo UI. They all talk with the Redis, and they have like hundreds, thousands of requests per minute. I think, like, really high throughput of requests. So when you have an HA deployment and you have 2 zones, like let's say in AWS, you have US East 1A and US East 1B, 2 zones for HA. Yeah. And then you have the worst scenario. This is the worst scenario.
Oh, I see. Because you were actually, your clusters were HA. So you were running them across, you basically had 2 regions you were running each cluster in for backup.
2 zones.
And that's why you're Redis HA. Yeah. Okay.
2 availability zones. And it'd be silly to use HA configuration without using real HA, like using HA configuration for Argo, but not using HA configuration for the clusters. So what do you have here?
Well, it's pretty common for people to use Redis HA on a single availability zone cluster just for performance. not really for like failover where they're not worried about, you're not really worried about Redis failing and then needing to go to another cluster. But if you're running a cluster that's across availability zones, I see now why, especially in your setup, you would have this much higher networking cost because you have to cross those availability zones so often.
Yeah, and that's without talking about the issues with Redis, the license change, the CVEs we have recently. We have many CVEs recently.
Yep.
And the one that came with that was fixed in Argo CD 2.11 was a breaking change. You have like operational overhead for just managing Redis for Argo CD.
Yeah. Yeah, that is like, well, so on the licensing change, was that it didn't sound like that was a motivating factor for you, really, but it sounds like maybe that was kind of a bonus in your decision.
Yeah, not for us, but somebody contacted me about the blog post and told me exactly about the license. He have a problem with the license and also changed from Redis to Valky.
Yeah.
Just for the license. So it's a cherry on top, yes, but it comes with Valky.
I think that license change did have a downstream effect of slowing down updates to Redis in Argo CD, because in Argo CD, of course, we ship with a specific version of Redis, and when they made that license change to the, I think it's like business source license or something, there were a lot of questions about if we could ship with that license in Argo CD because it's not a CNCF approved license. But we actually came to the conclusion that the CNCF license approval only applies to code that we're essentially like building. So like it's meant really for libraries that we're using. Like how do we license Argo CD? When you go to deploy Argo CD, it will deploy Redis by default, but that can have a separate license. It doesn't actually impact our license. But so even though it didn't actually have an impact on us to deliver Argo CD, it did have an impact on just the perception of how quickly we would do that update. And that meant there were some CVEs that were sitting around because they were no longer, that Redis version was no longer supported. It's only after Redis changed course and they updated the license for Redis 8, we actually bumped the version of Redis in Argo CD. And that only happened a few months ago. So it's only in Argo CD versions 3.2, 3.2 and forward that we have Redis 8 shipped by default, which is now getting the security patches and stuff, and the CVEs are being resolved there. But it is interesting that, like, even though for us the license didn't have an impact on our ability to like to allow people to use Redis, it did have an impact on you and our users because they weren't able to get some of the CVE fixes that they wanted in a timely manner. So that makes sense that it would open the door for you to think like, hey, it would be actually nice to use Valkey because we don't have to worry about this license thing anymore.
Mm-hmm. That's the operational overhead again, and the cost. Three reasons we thought about. Why do we need Redis? Like, let's switch it.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of people don't know probably this, but you can actually run Argo CD without any cache at all. You don't have to run it with Redis. Now, it'll run really slow. The performance will be terrible. There's a reason that there's a cache there. But especially if you had a smaller cluster or whatever, if you wanted to have no Redis cache, it will continue to operate. It can still go and work and do things. It's just going to work really slowly. Now, for you to move to Elasticache, again, Redis in Argo CD is treated as a throwaway cache. So we don't have to preserve state. We don't really care if it gets destroyed. It's just going to rebuild anyway off of the state of whatever's happening in Kubernetes. So it'll come back no matter what. So in your case, what was the process like to move to Elasticache? Was it pretty easy? Was it just a couple values? Are you using the Helm chart to deploy Argo CD?
Yeah, so it pretty much was pretty easy. The only things you have to notice beforehand is to enable the Redis TLS for the three components that use Redis. Other than that, everything goes smoothly. You have the Redis, Argo CD build the cache again. It doesn't matter if it's in Redis or Elastic Cache. It built it from scratch and just need to connect. That's it.
Now we'll throw the blog post. I just threw it in the chat, and I'll throw it on for people that are watching the live stream. You can see it on the screen. You could Google that. But you do have the example configuration here where you basically just have to pass in the Redis use TLS. I'm actually surprised that we don't ship Redis TLS by default when we use it. And then you just specify, you just disabled Redis and then set an external Redis, and you were basically done. No other hiccups or anything? Any surprise in that migration at all?
No, it was surprisingly smooth.
Did you need to, I mean, you changed these values and you sent them to, I assume you deployed it probably using Argo CD. They would have automatically restarted the pods because you would have set these additional arguments. So you didn't, right? You didn't have to do any additional like telling it to restart manually or anything.
Yeah, we manage Argo CD inside Argo CD with the Argo Helm chart. We pass the values, the pod were reset, and when it came back again, we use the Elastic Cache.
Yeah, great, amazing. And then it's just super quick, and then you just instantly saved about $1,900 a month.
95%, yeah.
95% cost reduction. So Nathaniel, you get a bonus for that?
I wish.
You're like, hey, I just saved the company like $24,000 a year.
Can I have it?
$22,000 a year. You maybe give me 10, you know? Give me a little incentive to keep finding these great cost reductions.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish.
There's a great graph, and for people that are listening to the podcast, they're not going to be able to see it, of course. But if you go and look at the blog post that'll be in the show notes, there's this graph that shows the costs, and it shows all of these expenses for these interzone conversations that are happening across your multi-zone clusters. And then once you switch, it looks like maybe partway through January, but definitely in February, the graph basically goes to almost to zero.
Yeah, you can also notice November 24, it was pretty low. Let's say the star were aligned, like all the Argo servers and the Redis master was in the same zone. That's what we figure in looking back. That's why we figure you can see like December and October, September, they all were high, and November was low.
Yeah, I guess you could use some like node selectors or something to try to make sure that those things were in the same zone. But that's a level of optimization that still, even if you did that, it probably still doesn't get you anywhere close to this cost savings anyway.
Yeah, and we wanted to have a HA.
Yeah, it did.
We kept it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
For all of your Argo CD instances, you use this kind of HA setup?
Yeah, all of them use it.
And beyond the cost here, has that ever caused you any grief or any issues?
Like behind the cost, you have the operational overhead, like I said, and that's the two main issues. Like
I am familiar. I was with some people will use a hot backup setup with Argo CD, where basically what they do is they deploy Argo CD into 2 different clusters. And they're pointing at the same resources. They're exact copies of one another. But to keep them from potentially getting into a fight, they just scale down the application controller to 0 in the hot backup. And that prevents it from talking to any external clusters. So it basically just sits there and is in kind of like an error state where it's not able to reach the clusters. And then if they get into a disaster situation where the cluster that Argo CD is deployed to gets deleted or something, they just add replicas to the application controller and it will automatically pick everything up and continue on. So that actually goes a little bit to the Argo tip that we started with in the episode of using what we would call the nuclear option, setting the application controller scale down to 0. And then that gives you a hot backup. But I also don't talk to very many people who have like Argo just straight up crash. They might get it locked up because they get into a controller fight, or they don't have enough pods available. They don't have enough resources available on their cluster or anything. But just like Argo CD doesn't really crash like, oh no, it's all broken, we don't know why. And there's no way to get it back. I have had a few cases where I've gotten Argo CD into a state where it was difficult to recover, and I basically just reapplied the manifests from Git and got everything fixed that way, so it wasn't too bad. But now that you've done this shift over to using Elasticache, which of course is using Valkey, and again, the reason that they're using Valkey is because Redis changed the license. Because before Elasticache was a Redis service, I believe, and so now that they've made that change, you can take advantage of the cost savings, which is pretty cool. And you don't have to manage Redis at all. All the CVEs are automatically patched for you. They take care of it. You don't worry about it. So it sounds like there's really been no downsides for you at all in this change.
Yes, we run like this since February, and we haven't seen any issues since then.
Yeah, and I do think it's such a low risk thing anyway, because like even if, again, with Argo CD, Redis is kind of a throwaway cache. So like even if Elasticache went down and you needed to deploy Redis to get things back, you could just set it to run. Like you could literally just deploy Redis and it would refill the cache and it would get back to work and you'd be back in business while they worked out the Elasticache. And then if you wanted to switch back, you could just undo that change. So I mean, in terms of like riskiness, whenever we're dealing with state and caches and data, people get nervous. But with Argo CD, there's really no reason to get nervous about Redis getting tanked. We actually had an interesting bug that we dealt with for a user or customer who was having an issue where they could only get Argo CD to sync after they deleted Redis. And so they were constantly deleting Redis to get it to go and sync. And what we found is that they had basically set their cache refresh rate in conflict with their sync schedule. I can't remember exactly how it worked, but basically the setting that they had set for the cache expiration made it so that the cache expiration would never hit, and so it would never refresh the cache. And so the way that they were getting around it was they would just delete Redis, which forces the cache to refresh, which would then trigger the synchronization. A hard refresh too would have solved that in Argo CD. But I think that it was easier for them to do that rather than go and do a hard refresh on a whole bunch of applications at once. but yeah, once we looked at it and figured out that they just had these conflicting settings that they were running into that was causing them heartburn, and got it resolved, and they were back in business. So yeah, that was pretty cool. And then for you, this was published in Kaltura Technology. Is that the company you work for?
Yeah, that's the Medium page for my company, for Kaltura.
And you guys do essentially data science research stuff?
No, we mainly we have a video platform and an AI infused video platform for companies, education, and so on.
Oh, okay.
We like provide the platform to serve video, like manage your content, your video for employees, your training,
Yeah.
your
Employee trainings. Okay, gotcha. Okay. I thought I thought I had seen a bunch of stuff about you guys doing data science stuff, but I think that was all about like how you do AI extraction from videos and like
yeah.
I gotcha. Okay, all right. I had misunderstood. Okay, yeah, that sounds very cool. So now that you've switched over that everything to, and obviously you're an AWS shop. You don't deploy to any clusters anywhere else other than AWS?
The Argo CD is still on AWS, yeah. But
Yeah.
you can use this solution in any cloud. You can use the managed service or for GCP or for Azure or Oracle, so on.
Yeah, and I think you would see very similar benefits no matter which cloud provider you used. Now, if users want to use Valkey directly, if they wanted to host it themselves, it's really easy to do in Argo CD. In the Helm install options, there's an option for setting what image is deployed for Redis. You can literally just replace it with Valkey, and it'll just run. So if people wanted to do that, even just for licensing reasons, they can totally do that. We might add documentation in Argo at some point to just show people how that works. It's like there's almost a debate about not doing it because it's like, well, it's really simple. It's just replace the image tag inside of the Helm chart. So like, do we need documentation on that? But I think we'll probably have it in there. And I know that some people, we had a talk at ArgoCon where some folks were using Dragonfly instead of Redis. So there are options there, and they each have their own benefits. But sounds like zero regrets on this one, saving a ton of money, which is a huge benefit. If you're not using multi-availability zone Argo CD clusters, do you think you would still bother to do this, or would you just run Argo CD inside of the cluster? Because you wouldn't have any of the networking costs.
Yeah, we maybe haven't thought of it in the first, but looking back, we will still do it because of the just letting AWS manage the life cycle, the CV patching, and ensuring the SLA, and not managing Redis. We just want to manage Argo CD and GitOps, not Redis.
Yeah, absolutely. Just closing those CVEs is a pretty big benefit, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore, and Redis is going to run. you're just going to get your cache and move on with your lives. And like, who cares about cache? Like, right? Like, nobody wants to think about cache. They just want it to run in the background and not have issues with it. So that makes sense. Yeah, like I said, we did have a talk at ArgoCon about using Dragonfly, I think it is, which is another alternative to Redis, and I think a dedicated caching system. I don't know too much about it. I missed that talk, but if people are interested in that, you can find it on YouTube for the ArgoCon replays. We didn't catch you at ArgoCon, did we? In Atlanta this time around, did we?
We did. I actually presented a different topic. different solution we did.
Oh wait, what was your presentation at ArgoCon? How did I forget this? I'm not connecting any of the dots today.
It was the lightning talk about it called the GitOps Armada, like letting Argo CD to manage your clusters in the GitOps way, let's call it, using attributes to application set with cluster generator attributes to select where to deploy what.
Oh yes, okay. I do remember. I when I reviewed this talk, but the way that the scheduling works, it was like 6 months ago. So okay, all right, yeah. The GitOps Armada set sail with Kubernetes fleet automation. And you do have, I mean, you have hundreds of clusters, and you're needing to add new regions all the time, shift traffic, all this stuff. And so I know you did a lightning talk, but maybe give us like the 5-minute overview of what the secret has been for you to manage a fleet of Argo CDs.
So it was making everything GitOps, like using Terraform or any other IAC solution to create the clusters and write the metadata, the critical metadata like region, cluster type, cloud provider, environment, and so on. And later on, using external secrets operator to pull them into Argo CD, like adding a ship, let's call it, to Argo CD, and using those the metadata.
Those are just cluster secrets, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can unpack that for just a second for people that are listening. When you add a cluster to Argo CD, Argo CD basically goes and creates a user and a role, and then it puts the certificate information into a Kubernetes secret that specifies where the cluster is, how to talk to it, the certificate data, so you can reach out. And you can add, it sounds like you were using that to also add a lot of metadata. So all of the metadata that was needed was there. And then once you have that, you plug in an application set cluster generator that's going after whatever specific labels that you've set, and you're now automatically generating all the baseline stuff.
For example, for AWS, deploy Carpenter and AWS Load Balancer. Boom, all your AWS cluster have that. And GCP has its own tools, and Azure has its own tools. That's on. For prod, use X, and dev use Y. That's the pattern we use.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons that I liked this talk so much. And again, sorry, I had forgotten all about. I was like, you were even there, and I was there too. I don't think we saw each other or chatted. You probably talked with Revital and talked with her. But one of the things that I liked about your talk is that you did use attribute-based, basically a tag-based deployment style with the application set cluster generator, because a lot of people, and this is one of our Argo CD anti-patterns that we document, a lot of people will use the cluster generator and they'll build very specific logic, like, oh, if the cluster is named this, then deploy these things. And it's like, no. Follow the tag-based strategy, right? Where like in your case, you're looking specifically at different regions and they get different things deployed. Or if it's dev, it gets different stuff. If you're deploying to GCP, it gets different stuff. And you can just do it based on tags. And then all you do is just update the tags, and it will automatically regenerate applications. And you don't have to do any. This is one of those cases where people will be like, oh, I need that information in my pipeline. And you're like, there is no pipeline. Like, there's no pipeline at all. It's just what the secret says. Now you're creating them via Terraform and then saving them to Vault or to some other secrets provider. And then you have external secrets set up to bring those in.
We use AWS Secrets Manager. Okay. You can use Vault. You can use GCP Secrets Manager. You had the the metadata as tags, actually tags to the secret. And external secrets operator pull them into the secrets as labels. You add labels, you have the spatial label for the secret, right? The Argo CD cluster secret, I think, Argo CD, Argo Proj, IO cluster,
Yeah.
and then you have the your labels, and that's it. You have a label select. You can use label selectors.
That's one of those things that, like, once you see it as an Argo user, you're like, oh yeah, that's way easier. Like that's real, like, GitOps thinking of just like, yeah, I'm just going to set some labels and some attributes and everything's just going to automatically work and you're going to be in business. And I'll pull up for the chat and I'll throw it. We can throw it in the show notes too. The link to the YouTube replay, because it should be up now. Yep, I see the full playlist. I'll post. Yeah, how do I want to add it? Yeah, I'll just add a link to the lightning talk. It's only 8 minutes. Definitely worth a watch, and it does get the octopus approval thumbs up in terms of best practices for how you manage a fleet of clusters. Now, do you use a similar strategy for managing all your Argo CD instances?
Not actually. That's just manage in Argo CD. Each Argo CD manage itself. So we don't have a central Argo CD that manage all the other Argo CD. You can do it, but we don't.
Well, this is actually a place where we see a lot of people starting to use, because it's kind of some newer features in Octopus Deploy, but they're starting to use something like Octopus Deploy to do that, because so a lot of people, when they first start off, they'll say, okay, I'll have an Argo instance that connects to all these clusters, and it will use maybe an application set generator to deploy an Argo CD to each of those clusters. But then you get into like the question of like, okay, there's a new version of Argo CD, and I want to test that. I want to roll it out to a couple of clusters and see how it goes, and I want to be able to do rollbacks. Now, I could use progressive sync with application sets, which we just moved to beta. It's out of alpha finally after 2 years. It's moved to beta. But if you do that, you lose auto sync, and you don't really have kind of granular control to do like full health checks and stuff like that. So this is where a lot of people would use something, and then you also have to manage like the parent Argo CD instance as well. You need to upgrade that one, and you don't have a way to manage that. So a lot of people use Octopus, and basically each Argo CD becomes a tenant, and it goes and updates each of those, runs health checks, does all the stuff, and you can manage the fleet that way. And that's a very scalable way to do it. That's easier than trying to fit it into an application set. I think progressive sync is a cool feature, but it's really just a blast radius reducer than it is like a testing strategy. It's kind of like canary releases, right? Like you wouldn't run all of your tests on a canary release. Like that's not the only place you would run the tests, right? You would run them before you started a canary release. But the canary release is there to just be a catch-all for any potential issues that could happen afterwards. So that's where I think progressive sync fits in. But yeah, that's really cool. That's a great talk, and I'm glad you brought it up, and we were able to explore it a little bit.
Yeah.
So what's next? Is there anything else on the horizon for you guys that you're thinking about with Argo CD? Any other things you're trying to solve or new approaches?
Not at the moment, but if we'll come, we'll if it's something like this or like the GitOps Armada, you will know.
Like, we'll know about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you didn't submit any talks for ArgoCon Amsterdam, did you?
No, not for
okay.
no this time.
I was gonna say I haven't done the reviews yet, and they're due Wednesday, so I have between now and Wednesday to go through and look at the rest of the talks that were submitted there. And tomorrow is AWS reInvent. So I'm going to be at AWS reInvent for the next 3 days. And so I don't know when I'm going to pack in the time to do all the CFP reviews. The plane ride isn't long enough to make it happen. So it's got to be, going to try to shove it into every nook and cranny. Well, thank you, Netanel, for taking us through your use case, sharing how you guys were able to save so much money. Do you have anything else that you want to bring up or share or promote on Argo Unpacked?
It's more a general thing. We started with Redis and its issue, and when we come to a point where we think we can do this anywhere, like any point in our infrastructure, we can look at it and say, why we do this? Why we do this? It's like evolving your thought to be more critical thinking, and just the small things make it better.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to do a little bit of optimization, especially when you get to your scale where you have this many Argo instances. The simple choice of deciding, hey, let's just use the Elasticache service. We're gonna save a ton of money that way. I see a lot of people, by default, even at your scale, are still using some of the default sync scheduling on Argo CD rather than taking advantage of maybe the event-based synchronization. Now, Argo CD by default, every 3 minutes, it's going to go through and do a sync and a refresh. But for most organizations, they probably should set it to like an hour. And then if they set up webhooks, they will automatically lower dramatically the number of pods that they need to run Argo CD, assuming they're running Argo CD HA. So there's lots of little things like that. So that's a great tip, Netanel. So for our audience, think critically about your infrastructure at every level. There are probably lots of opportunities to save some money, be more efficient, be reliable, be scalable. And I think that'll be a good note to end on, Netanel. So thank you for coming on and walking us through your use case. Again, I posted the link to the blog post in the chat. I'll put it on the show notes for people to are listening on the podcast. And then coming up next time on Argo Unpacked, we are going to have on, oh wait, I just had it right here. Folks, sometimes things are easy and we're organized, and sometimes we're not. The next one, we've got Mike Tucheron coming on from Adobe. He was originally planned to come on several months ago, but after the holidays, we're going to be off for the break. We've got Christmas, we've got New Year's, or at least I do, here in the States. And then we'll be back with another Argo Unpacked in January, Argo Unpacked 18. And we're going to be talking about some of the really challenging scale issues that can happen with Argo CD. And that should be a really fun conversation with Mike. Of course, ArgoCon Amsterdam is coming up in March. And so if you have not got your tickets yet, love to see you all there. I'll be there if you want to hang out and grab a soda or whatever. I'll be there to hang out with you. And then we've got KubeCon coming back to Salt Lake next November. So we've got that going on. And of course, this week I'll be at AWS reInvent in Las Vegas. So if anybody's there, come by the Octopus booth. I'll be there tomorrow through Thursday. And of course, the team is already there. So if people are already in Vegas and they're tuning in before they get to the show, you can go meet the team that's at AWS reInvent and catch our latest stuff that we've been developing, and lots of stuff to show off. I think it's going to be a really exciting year. So with that, thanks to everybody for joining us on another episode of Argo Unpacked. Glad we could share some tips with you and potentially save you a lot of money. Thank you, Netanel, for putting it all together.
Thank you, Dan.
Hey, everybody take care, and we'll see you on the internet. Stay synced.